Hello chess friends and welcome to my Crazyhouse video where I'm going to share with you my preparation for my upcoming Crazyhouse World Championship match in the knockout phase against the FIDE Master Royal Blue 4. And well, in this game I'm just going to show where me and my preparation will be playing with the white pieces. Now one big mistake I made in some of my previous matches is I was playing openings I didn't really know very well. And I think that, well, with this video hopefully I can sort of show the lines in a way whereby having to explain a way that makes sense to you guys, it'll also help me to kind of understand what I'm doing and to not like play like a 1200 as soon as I leave book. So anyway, let's get into the game where I noticed when checking the opening tree, which is a really great resource for finding the opponent's games online, that is openingtree.com. Well, I used that and I found some, well, quite valuable conclusions that, named after e4, my opponent is almost exclusively playing the French defense in Crazyhouse, which is kind of nice because the French line I do score very well with in general, as with the white pieces. And then after d4 and d5, well, at this point I sort of don't want to play my usual knight c3 line actually, that I've played most of the time. Because obviously if I play it, it's going to have something prepared in this case. So I'm going to actually deviate and play the advanced French instead. And it's true that the advanced French is also the recommendation of Crazy Arrow, which considers these lines to be like +3 or more for white or high depth. So I think it makes it a very good choice, and also the fact that he does play the move knight to c6 virtually exclusively here. Well, that's kind of a good sign that basically these positions are, well, going to be a good area where we can target him. So after knight c6, like usually in these positions, black is going for some knight g7, knight f5 and trying to attack this pawn. I mean, in Buckhouse, it's not such a bad opening because often you're going to have good drops to be able to defend yourself on the f6 and h6 weak light dark squares. But in Crazyhouse, I do find it to be somewhat less effective, and I hope that in this video, I can demonstrate why that's the case. So after knight f3, he almost always plays the move bishop to d7. He has played a few other moves, but in general, this is what we're going to focus on. And then I've decided here that I'm going to play the move of bishop to d3, because I think that it is objectively the best move. It's also the most flexible. I mean, you're not really having to worry, for example, about black having a pawn drop on e4, as you would in Buckhouse chess. So after bishop d3, this is kind of where we have a bit of a crossroads, where he's chosen a lot of different moves, but the fact that white has scored 82% at the 2500 plus on Crazyhouse does suggest to me that white should be winning this position with best play. So let's find out how to do it. So the move he's played most often is actually the move bishop to e7. But taking a look at this move, this looks so ugly because you're leaving the knight without any really good square. I mean, knight 6, you're just going to chop it off and just crash you on f6 and g7. So it's very hard to see what black's sort of realistic follow-up is going to be in such a case. So on bishop e7, I think that a move like castles is very natural in this sort of position. I do also wonder whether even playing knight c3 is kind of worthwhile here as well. But okay, the move that he faces most often is the move of castles. So let's go with that at least to see what he is kind of playing as the follow-up. Okay, so he's playing this line of h5. And it's funny because I actually have played some of these ideas myself, but in the lines where the knight goes to f6 and e4, which I think is a better version for black of the lines we see here. I mean, this video a lot of just about kind of strategically understanding why white should kind of improve the position. To me, I think a move like knight to c3 is very natural. Just simply activate the knight and just sort of ask black what he's kind of doing here. So let's go with that as our move. So knight c3. And now he's had games where he's played knight h6 and games where he's played the move h4. Neither of which these moves I think really particularly impressed me, but h4 is a move that he has won some games with. So let's see what happens there. I think that in general, don't want to let black get a pawn h3, which could be annoying for our king. So let's stop that with h3. And we have a game with knight 6, so this is kind of his sub trying to, I don't know, create some sort of fortress. But okay, it doesn't particularly convince me here. Actually, the move that his opponent played at bishop takes h6. Even though his opponent lost the game, I think it wasn't because of this move. I think it actually is very good to get the knight in hand in these sorts of positions. So after bishop takes h6 and rook takes h6, so, I mean, if you allow gh6 and knight g7, obviously the black king is very exposed here, and knight takes d5 and a pawn drop on g7 or f6 is very quickly going to be fatal. But okay, what if he plays a little bit differently? What if he tries some move like, for example, instead of g takes h6, he plays rook takes h6. As I try to find my my study, so there we go. Well, that's what he normally does, and okay, in that case, I think knight at g8 is one of his opponents played against him, BB the game. I think this is just incredibly strong. After rook h8, knight takes e7. He played a move knight takes e7, probably fearing queen e7, knight b5 or something. But after knight takes, I think that now bishop at g5, that this is just completely winning for white. I guess bishop at f6 is a bit more forcing, but I don't really see a good way for black to really defend his pawn on h4. And the thing is, you're not just that you're losing the pawn on h4 as black, but also that gives white a very powerful drop on either f6 to hit the dark squares, or even g6 to hit the light squares, and it just seems to me that black is just completely busted. It's a sort of position where honestly you should even beat like a perfect Crazyhouse player with white, otherwise I probably should pick a different game to play, or as I did in fact. And anyway, going back to, I guess, the position before, I mean, we can kind of see that h4 is kind of silly in this position, but what if he plays the move knight h6 instead? I have some doubts he's actually going to do this, because I think that, well, he lost every game that he played in this line, so probably he's learned his lesson by now. Then again, he did play this h4 move, so you never know. Well, I think still this plan of takes and transforming position with knight g8, in order to get the material in hand on the dark squares, is still really strong. We're after rook h8, knight takes c7. Okay, so he played knight takes c7 here, and again, I think still bishop to g5 is still a very good move, even when you're not winning the pawn on h4. It still works pretty well, and, well, in this point, he had games where he played bishop at g4 and bishop to c6. If bishop at g4, I think that just knight b5 is going to be very strong. The plan is basically just to take on e7 and, just drop something on d6 or c7. I think the threat of knight takes c7, pawn d6 one, which black really doesn't have a reasonable defense to. And if you play like knight f5 and try to cover it that way, well, I can even just play bishop takes, and again, you kind of see that white is winning with pretty much every move here, I think. Like even knight at d6 and, c takes, knight d6. White's just getting the material in hand with tempo, like pawn f6, and, the attack just plays itself for white on the dark squares at this point. I think black can already resign, to be honest. But instead, well, if they play bishop to c6, I mean, it's such a passive move, and I think still the plan knight b5 and is liquidating. It's just going to be completely crushing. So it doesn't seem like black really has a good defense to this sort of idea in general. Like, if he plays a move like a6, I mean, there's going to be other problems elsewhere. Like, for example, even just knight takes d5 and dropping the pawn on d6 or f6 just feels completely, murderous at this point. Like, black is just unable to defend himself on the dark squares, and he doesn't get the time he needs to get the drops on the dark squares to defend himself. So yeah, with that, that's a pretty good sign that his most common line he plays basically loses by force. So let's see what else he might do after bishop d3 if he doesn't put the bishop on e7. Well, he's also had some games where he played knight to b4, which, to me, knight b4 might be the best move for black, at least according to computer, but I think it's already a clear sign that the position is strategically not very sound for black. And in that case, yeah, I noticed actually, interestingly enough, none of his opponents played the move bishop e2, which is kind of funny, because I think that even though it would be the best move in normal chess, I think it's actually a good move in Crazyhouse as well, because it's not like knight c2 is really a threat here. And after knight e7 and castle, I think that just it's not really obvious to me what black's plan should be. Like, if you play knight f5, for example, then, well, let's transpose your position, you can reach from some different move orders, but, well, there's a lot of good continuations, and the one that seems to, that Jan Lee has won with time after time after time, is to play c3, knight c6, and then just bishop f4, just kind of overprotecting the pawn, and sort of neutralizing any f6 ideas. Now, if I was playing black in this position, I'd definitely think about trying to get in some sort of g5 break and try to get counterplay that way. But if bishop e7, I think after knight d2 and g5, then you can just play like knight takes g5, and I don't think the tactics work out for black after takes, and bishop f6, well, we're hitting the rook and the queen, and if black does try something like queen takes g2, then yeah, we take, and I mean, knight at f4, king g1 is not really giving black the ammunition that he needs, and if rook g8, we can just play a move like pawn at g7, or pawn at g3, which might be a bit safer. I mean, black just doesn't have the material in hand to get the mating attack. If he does play something like knight at e3 to get the queen back, well, the problem is that after, say, knight king to f2 and knight takes d1, well, yeah, basically, it's a position where, as my computer goes crazy at this point, takes, yeah, rook d1. I mean, you have two knights in hand, and black's king is very open, and white's king is actually very safe. Like, once you, let's say, drop a knight on f4, or even just knight at b5, well, white's attack is a lot faster than black's, and it should be a pretty easy win without black having a knight in hand, which is what he really needs here. So, yeah, I think that, all in all, that bishop e2 kind of just makes his move look very silly. The fact that the computer wants to go back to c6 and play a whole tempo down is, again, not a very good advertisement for black's position here. So, yeah, that was a pretty easy answer to knight b4. The other moves he's played, like h5, just on move 5, he's played, like h5, knight e7, and bishop b4. Yeah, he hasn't really played these moves very often, but I guess we should still take a quick look. So, after h5, I mean, to me, it's a move that hasn't been played all at a high level. And I think probably for good reason. Where in this case, yeah, I'd probably just go castles and let him kind of transpose to his bishop e7 line. At least I'm guessing this is what his idea is in these positions. Okay, I had one game where he played knight h6, which... Okay, I guess in this version, at least bishop h6, knight g8 isn't as available, but still he can go knight c3, and I mean, it's not that easy to come up with a much better move than bishop e7 anyway. Because if you do try some fishing pole like knight g4 or whatever, well, I can just recycle with bishop g5 and bishop e7. Takes, knight takes, and I think that the ideas that we've seen before of going knight b5 and hitting c7, d6 is just completely crushing at this point. It's a good plan to keep in mind. It seems to work against a lot of the lines he likes to play, especially when h5 has been played. It's a nice way to, well, to exploit it and just to make the most of those weak dark squares. So he's also played knight g7, and, well, knight g7 we actually might spend a bit more time looking at than usual, because I think that this is, well, it's a line that's been played quite a bit by strong players to 500 plus level. And I mean, the way that his games normally went were with castles and with black going knight to f5. But these structures in general should be very nice for it, I think, after bishop takes f5 takes and bishop g5. We're going to just keep dropping pieces on the dark squares to really kind of punish black for his purely light squared strategy. For example, in this case, well, let's see. Okay, I did have this in a game against a 1900 where he went bishop e7. And then after bishop takes, he played the move knight takes e7, but... To me, I think that this just plays itself after knight h5. We're just going to pile the pressure on their f6 and g7 points. And, well, for rook g8, you can probably just play like knight c3 and kind of keep bishop at f6 in reserve. And you're just going to get more material in hand for the attack. And black is just completely lost on a strategic level, because he doesn't have any way to safeguard his king on the light dark squares. And the light square attack is really not good enough for black here, especially without a knight in hand to put a knight on h3 after the opening of the g file or something. So, okay, I guess after castles, maybe you can try some other move, perhaps, but I'm not really that convinced. I mean, he had one game where he went knight g6, which maybe objectively is a better try, but here as well, I think that white should be doing pretty well in a lot of different ways. I kind of like the idea of playing bishop at g5, and sort of prompting him to go move like f6 and trying to weaken his king, or if he plays bishop e7 just to take and go like bishop at a3, and sort of just basically kind of annoy him with these sort of moves. Like if queen d8, then yeah, even just something like knight c3. Seems like it should be pretty strong, like just going knight b5 and just basically getting the material in hand for attack on the dark squares. Which I think, even though this is probably not the absolute best line you could possibly play, it does still seem pretty good for white. I mean, I guess if you want to avoid knight g5, g6, you can start with bishop to g5, which is probably also very strong in this position, though it's not a move that he's faced before. I mean, I guess if black goes h6 and tries to go for g5 to break the pin, well, that does have the problem is it does weaken his king in the long term, and, well, probably we can play a well-timed h4 at some point, maybe after knight bd2 to kind of exploit that. In any case, it's sort of clear at knight e7. It's probably the best move for black, but I don't think it's good enough. And finally, bishop b4 just sort of strikes me as a bit of a beginner's check, to be honest. I mean, I know that the philosophy in Crazyhouse in many cases the move c3 is kind of a weakening move, but here it just seems like a pretty good choice, where after bishop e7... I don't really see c3 like as a move that I would sort of not want to play in this sense. Like, for example, after castles, if he goes like h5, which I assume is... I think this is his idea. I can always check the opening tree to see if he is playing this way. Yeah, he's going h5, and okay, at this point, I think that a fairly simple approach is just bishop to f4. Because again, if he goes like g5, you can just play bishop e3, and, the pawn storm isn't really leading anywhere, whereas white can just sort of open up the center, and I think that black is just going to be strategically dead lost, because he needs the pieces to back up the attack on the king. But instead, if he plays, like, let's say, knight h6, then yeah, once again, you can play, like, bishop h6, knight g8 in the worst case, and probably going knight a3 and going for the knight b5 and take on c7, d6. That's probably going to be even better, in fact. In the worst case, I can also go to c2 and also kind of kill the black knight on h6 in that sort of way. So anyway, it's clear that white is doing very, very well and should just be technically winning without too much trouble here. So yeah, with that, we've actually looked at all the different lines with bishop d3, and I think I've shown pretty well why it is that this line is basically just strategically lost for black. He has tried moves other than bishop d7, so let's have a quick look to see what he's doing there. So in this case, some other move he's played is bishop to e7, and, well, I mean, the logical move would be to just play bishop to d3 and just play like we normally do. And yeah, now he's played h5 and tried to do this without the bishop d7 move, but it strikes me as still being like a very weak continuation by white. For example, if we just castle and he plays like knight h6, which is what he did in one game, then yeah, it still takes. And You know, we've kind of already talked about these positions before with like knight at g8 and bishop at g5 and put the knight on b5 is basically a strategic refutation of black's plan here. What else has he done? I mean, instead of the move bishop d7 or bishop e7, there are a couple of other moves he tried. Like he played queen d7 in one game, but that's not really a move I would take seriously. He did play knight g7, which is actually the most common move in this position. So again, we have a case where he sort of plays the main line very, very rarely, which is sort of curious. And in that case, well, bishop to d3 is kind of the move that is, well, scoring the best white at a high level. And I'm sort of curious to see whether he is just transposing into other lines in that case. I've already had a game where he played like knight to g6 at this point, but yeah, I think that in this case, like even just castles and, you know, he can try to play something like knight to bishop e7, but okay, I think that the plans we've seen before, like even just playing, say, bishop to e3 just to avoid any sacks on d4. And so I like, say, knight c3, rook e1. I mean, in the worst case, I could probably even just play like very slowly in such a position. For example, with something like, I don't know, playing, well, I guess something like even just bringing the knight towards g3 and h5. Like this is one way I can probably improve the position in the worst case. I guess he could also try and move like knight d4, and you know, maybe this is something I don't necessarily want to allow him to get such a nice lead and get such a nice center. On the other hand, I'm also getting quite a strong like initiative with moves like rook e1 or even knight c3 first, just so if e4 I can, you know, give back the piece in order to get the initiative. And then with moves like bishop f4, rook e1, bishop e5, it does seem like a pretty strong attack. I think this happened actually in some games, if I remember correctly. I thought this happened in some games between Opperwesen against Agajisugi against Opperwesen, but maybe I'm thinking of something a bit different. Because I think in that line the knight was on e4 instead of like f6, as it were. Or on g8, I should say. So after knight takes d3, I think that, you know, after c d3, you know, white should be much better, but I don't think there's something I would rather avoid, so maybe this is a position where it makes sense to play bishop g5 and just not let him get in his knight to f5 or knight g6 idea. Because I think that after h6, bishop h4, and let's say if he plays g5, I do think that these positions are very promising for white. After knight f5, you know, you can play, you know, even a move like bishop d3 is even quite good, because he doesn't really threaten to take when you've got the knight f6 drop afterwards. And actually, it just seems like a strategic refutation. Because after bishop e7 and c3, well, I mean, black is just weak in his king side for no real gain. White can sort of develop normally, and black's not really going to get the counterplay he needs in order to have a playable game with all these weaknesses in his structure. So maybe I'll go bishop g5, and I mean, I have a feeling that he might play a move like queen d7, which is a more common move at a high level, but okay, then I can go bishop d3, just avoiding knight f5, because I can just take, and well, this sort of position I think must be a lot better for white after, say, castles, and, you know, after bishop to g4, trying to pin. You know, I can even play a move like knight bd2 if I want to, saying that if he takes that, well, the two minor pieces are going to be much more valuable than the queen in such a close structure. And if bishop e7, then yeah, probably I just take and, you know, just play normal moves like, say, bishop to c5, and just sort of rook e1, knight f6. Feels like some sort of combination like this is just going to leave his king way too exposed on the dark squares in the long run. So I think that that's a pretty convincing strategic refutation, and you know, if he does start with queen d7, I mean, the lazy approach would just be to play bishop d3 and, you know, let him offer get a transposition if he wants to, or if he does play knight f5, just play the same sort of way. We might have bishop f5 or even a move like c3, which then after h6 I go bishop f4, and what kind of say this knight is just not doing anything on f5, though I can play castles, rook e1, knight bd2, and just wait for the right moment to take on f5 and, say, drop something on f6 for a decisive attack. Of course, it's not necessarily that simple, but it still should be very good for white with correct play. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm probably going to go bishop g5 in this particular move order, just to kind of sort of avoid any preparation you might do with bishop d3, knight d5, or something like this. Because I did play this advanced line quite a bit, actually, when I was, when I was starting out in Crazyhouse, when I wasn't knowing any theory, but just trying to play normal moves. Well, this is what I was doing, so you might think, okay, Max used to play this, so maybe he'll go back to it. So I guess this is one way in which we can kind of, well, sort of surprise him a little bit, as it were. So yeah, that pretty much is what he's done within this line with knight c6. I guess also, it is worth checking very quickly what if he tries a different move order. Like, if he plays knight e7, for example, then after knight f3, you know, he can try to play, instead of knight bc6, some move like knight f5. But in reality, I think that in this case, like bishop d3, knight c6 is, well, transposing back to the lines that we've seen before, with, you know, this knight, bishop d3, knight f5. It does mean he did avoid the bishop g5 move order, so if I want to do that, maybe I should actually consider consider starting with the move bishop to g5. I think it's maybe a little bit less effective though when he isn't committed to knight c6, but okay, probably I can still play the same sort of way and just have a very comfortable position with some sort of system opening, which at least I can sort of play my first moves quickly while he is thinking quite a lot about his moves. So practically it should be quite good, I think. Now, if he plays a move like c5 instead, which at first looks like just a blunder because of the weaknesses, but it's actually not as bad as it looks. Yeah, I'll probably just take, and like after bishop takes c5, then something like queen at g4 just seems like a very good way to get the initiative, where the most common move actually at a high level has been pawn at g6, but I think that not having that pawn in hand later is going to hurt black. I think if white even just plays normal moves like knight f3, bishop d3, castles, and kind of just saves the pawn drop on h3 for later, I feel like you can go on to play normal chess and just say that black has no counterplay, whereas white has the space advantage to go for a kingside attack with some trades at the right moment. So I think that's pretty good, and if he does play bishop f8 instead, then, well, in that case, even a move like pawn at d6 is kind of interesting here, which could definitely surprise him a bit, but okay, maybe it's better to just play a normal move like knight f3, but I kind of like pawn at d6. It sort of feels nice to go for this sort of initiative and have him constantly worrying about drops on c7, because normally they play bishop d7 at this point, but I think that then after the move like knight to c3, well, you're threatening to take on d5 and drop a pawn on c7 in some positions, and, well, I think even with just normal development, it feels like white should just be completely crushing here. That's probably the reason why the computer wants to play pawn at f6, but pawn at f6 is also a move that does kind of give white a potential to kind of get some trades in. I think that after something like bishop to b5, it's the line that's given by the engine with bishop b7, knight c3, and the idea is kind of to sack the pawns, but get a very big lead in development, saying that bishop d6 is running into queen g7, but otherwise knight takes e5 is kind of a pain, and if they do play takes, you have knight takes, and you have to worry all about drops on c7. I mean, probably objectively speaking, this isn't the best line. I feel like it's a sort of shock weapon that will be, well, at least kind of fun to play and also very hard for him to deal with. Because d6 at this point, like, only been played in a few games, and there were games played in like 2016 only by Maface, so not a very common line at all. But okay, it's true, I guess, that, yeah, knight f3 objectively, that sticking to this up is probably the better way to play it in terms of getting the maximum advantage. In any case, I think that's pretty good in terms of the French, and I guess at this point we should also very quickly see what he's played in terms of possible alternatives to playing the French defense. I mean, it's not like 99% chance he plays the French, but you never know, there's a 1% chance he might do something else. I mean, after e4, the second most common move that he's played has been the move of c5, which, of course, is a quite serious mistake in Crazyhouse, because after knight f3, and then d4, there are going to be some quite serious weaknesses on c7, with black falling very far behind in development. So after knight c6, yeah, I'd probably just play like d4, takes, and again, kind of play it like sort of normal chess, so that he kind of feels like, okay, I can still play like a normal chess game, but still actually he's just lost in these lines. I notice he has 2 wins with knight takes d4, but again, it's not a move that I'm think is particularly inspiring. If he plays knight at c6, I can just move the queen to some safe square, and if he plays pawn to d6, then yeah, just normal moves like knight c3, and being knight f6 with e5, and just playing very aggressively, or even just going after f7 is probably also a very good plan, because that is quite a big weakness for black here. And if instead he plays it a little bit differently, like let's say he plays the move of, instead of knight d4, he plays knight f6 at this point. Well, in this case, I guess that I can just play, I mean, a move like knight c3 must be the best move here. And then after knight c3, I had a game with pawn at b4, but okay, I feel like these sort of gimmicky moves are basically just asking for a forced loss, because white can just play knight cb5 and threaten knight to at c6 and knight at c7, or even pawn at c7 is also a decisive threat. So I think at this point, black can probably already resign after such a move. So we can see if he plays c5, it basically he's just losing by force. It's not that difficult to see why. Because if you do drop a pawn on c7, like some of my opponents have done, like white just gets way too big a lead in development for black to be able to overcome. So what else has he done against e4? I mean, he's played the move d5, knight f6, and e5 in a few games, but okay, let's have a quick look at it. So after e4, d5, well, I'll probably just play e takes d5 as usual. And I see he normally plays knight f6, and okay, I notice he hasn't faced the move bishop b5, which is the move that I've usually played with white. I guess he could try to prepare something based on the fact that, well, he might have seen some of my games against Jasugi, where Jasugi beat me with knight takes c6. But okay, one of those games was one where I sort of mouse slipped the move bishop to f1. I don't know how I did it, but, I have. I think it was when I had some problems with my mouse or something. But yeah, obviously if white just plays a move like, let's say... Actually, it's an interesting question what move is the best, because there are a lot of good options for white. I think knight to c3, must be a very natural move, and after e5. And let's say pawn at d5 is a move that, well, it's been very successful. Just the idea of takes, queen takes d5. Well, the point is you get the knight c7 drop to pick up the queen. So it's a sort of thing where if he probably doesn't expect this coming, and if he thinks he just blundered a piece with dc6, I guess he would get kind of discouraged. So I think this is probably going to be a pretty good choice against him in general. Even though the machine thinks that playing knight to df3... Well, actually, it did say that knight f3 or pawn at g5 was better, but, I kind of like d5 even more, to be honest. It just feels natural to grab the piece when you can. Well, in any case, that covers d5. He had a few games where he played one knight f6, but, okay, I'm not sure if he played this with any sort of fury in mind at all, or if he was just sort of messing around. But I can see he had a few games where he played this main line of knight f6, e5, and knight to c6. And in that case, I might just play d4, which is not a move that he's faced yet. I mean, it's a knight that I've kind of explored, and also is going to at least lead to a kind of similar structure to the French. I can play bishop b5 and, play my usual ideas, so I don't think that's going to be a problem at all. I mean, if he does prepare knight f6, he probably is expecting me to go knight c3 instead, so this will be a little bit of a surprise for him in that regard. And finally, he has had a few games where he actually has played the move e5 on move 1, but I can sort of see that he doesn't really have a particularly great system against it, where he's playing like e4, e5, knight f3, and, after bishop c4 he had, should be bishop c4, not bishop to d3. Then, he's playing like bishop c5, and, I could learn in these lines and go a bit deeper in this sort of thing, but because I've looked at these lines like, say, castles, knight c3, and, I do know my fury a bit in terms of how to win these positions as white. But at the same time, I also feel like it's fine if he plays e5, he probably expects me to do some bishop c4 or some knight c3 move. So maybe I just surprise him as a counter surprise with either the Scotch game. Just kind of just getting a position where, if he plays the normal moves in normal chess where he kind of runs into a lot of problems. Or if I want to limit his options a bit, I could go knight to c3. And maybe just play some move like bishop e2 and just play my white openings with my black preparation with an extra tempo. Because, well, if he goes bishop c5 like knight e5, and d4 is a nice trap that's caught out a lot of very strong players. Like I've beaten Jan Lee sometimes in this line as well. So I think that this is a pretty good choice, and if he does play d5, then probably just take, and, well, play something like d4, just playing again like this sort of d4. Kind of like the d4 gambit actually in the bishop c5 lines, but okay, playing with an extra tempo, where black didn't play bishop to c5. So I guess you could argue that's actually a better version for black, so maybe in this case it would be more appropriate for white for me to play knight d5 first, and then after queen d5 then to play d4. Because I know this is a line that's given me a lot of headaches when I faced it in the past, where white has a very high plus score based on some games by Jan Lee and some others, where he beat me many times in this line. So maybe this is why I'll go for just ideas of knight at b5 or knight c3. And the computer thinks it's complete rubbish, but I feel like it's a sort of line where he's not going to be ready for it. You have to say ed4 and castles. Well, I just kind of attack here with like knight f4 or knight at b5. It's opposite, it does feel like it's much easier to play white in a practical game, especially if your opponent is not prepared for it. Like a pawn a3 and knight f4. It's kind of one interesting novelty as well that hasn't been played at a high level. But the idea of kind of hitting the queen and then taking could be something that, well, can cause some problems for him. Okay, I think that pretty much concludes my preparation for Royal Blue 4, where I kind of mainly focused on the advanced French and how I intend to basically prove that e5 is probably winning for white if white plays correctly. But in any case, we also saw how to do a few other lines that he might play on occasion. So yeah, if you did enjoy this video or if you learned something new, do make sure to leave a like and comment below with your thoughts. And also make sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with more of my Grandmaster chess videos. Anyway, I'm glad you guys enjoyed my preparation, and I'll see you in the next video.